Good morning. My name is Eric Ellis, and I'm here with my co-host.
Tommie Lewis with Make It Plain Consulting. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Tommie. We're here for another week of diversity conversations, and as always, things have been busy in our community. I think last week we had a number of callers that called in and really wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about what's happening in the schools. Certainly, we're going to spend some time during the program this morning talking about what has happened in Broward County in Florida and the massacre that has happened where 17 young people were killed, 14 were injured. Certainly, our prayers go out to those families in that community. But in some ways, I think that what we're seeing is schools are having some challenges with our young people being able to be safe, whether that's physically or whether that's emotionally through a lot of the things that may happen around diversity and a lack of respect. What are you seeing, Tommy?
Yeah, as we were talking about last week, Eric, I believe with regards to the situation here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and with Elder High School in particular, two things. Again, one, that the adults in the room did not have the courage and or the skills to speak truth to power. The truth is that there was some hate speech and or language being used.
Right.
Although it was covered by athletics
Right.
and the energy of rooting a particular team or school on,
Right.
at the end of the day, it was offensive. Secondly, it may not have been offensive to those who believed it was not offensive. And this is a problem. At Elder in particular, there is a culture, like many schools, organizations, and,
Right.
and communities. But we learned that of the adults that were in the arena, the students that were subjugated to the hate speech
Right.
and acts of bias, and those students who were actually perpetuating the hate speech,
Right.
there was a culture of hate speech, acts of bias, and discrimination, racism, and we can go down the list.
Right, and I think that certainly what we heard from some of our callers and what we've heard in the community and in many ways felt ourselves is that it's just shocking that we are still in this place. So many were hopeful if we look back on the I Have a Dream speech that Martin Luther King gave, and everybody wants to celebrate that and put that on every commercial and play it in every school. We are still struggling with being able to keep young people safe from that kind of harassment. I mean, it's almost shocking to people. Have you? I don't know about you, man, but I had a chance to share it with some of my friends from other cities around the country, and they're just blown away. Like, what? I mean, you all are really dealing with people saying that kind of thing during the game, and to remind our listeners that the student section at Elder High School was saying to an Asian American young player on the basketball team, P.F. Chang, open your eyes wider. And then they were saying to an African American player, are you on crack? Who's your daddy? And things like that, just being shouted out during the game, while everybody else was sort of an onlooker. And this didn't happen like for just a few minutes or maybe the first quarter, but this was deep into the third quarter. In other words, they even had halftime. To go get some refreshments and everything. And think about this, but the result was they came back in the same place and nobody was really horrified by that.
Yeah, so nobody was horrified by it. It wasn't checked. It was part of the culture. And then when the some of the folks who felt offended began to transition, they too, in the hallways, at the concession stands, were berated, if you will, as well. Eric, I learned that there were a couple of young African Americans who attended the other school, St. Xavier,
Right.
who had reached out, and Elder, who had reached out to their parents to come pick them up. And so I learned that the young people calling their parents, can you come and pick me up?
Wow.
I need to be picked up now. Parents are out, honoring that their child is at the game, have fun. Hey, I'll come get you in a little bit.
Right.
Well, I'll get a ride by my friend's father. No, you won't. I'll be there in just a moment, but just stand there. The parents, I've learned, did not understand the magnitude of the concern. And so where we want to transition to is not to always place blame on those who are ignorant and don't know.
Right.
So we have to extend grace as well.
Right.
But we also have to understand our own trials and tribulations or traumatizations. Is that when our young people or older people are yelling out for help,
Right. Under siege.
Under siege.
Right.
We have to hear it and know it. So when the young person calls and says, "I need to be picked up,"
Right.
parents, we need to listen to the words beyond the words.
Right. Right. And I'll tell you, the thing is, Tommie, I was listening, as many in our listening audience were this week, to what was happening in Broward County in Florida. And I'll tell you, I heard a former chief, Charles Ramsey, one of our legendary chiefs, African-American chief of police, former chief of police of Philadelphia. And he talked about the shooting, and he said he doesn't expect that Congress will do anything. And I listened to the pain of one of the mothers in particular that just screamed out, "Congress, what are you going to do? President Trump, what are you going to do? We can't keep losing our children to senseless violence, and you all act as though now is not the time to talk about these things." And I'll say one other thing, Tommie, because I believe that people are asking you and I the same question. When are we going to become serious around addressing issues of racism, sexism, homophobic tendencies, and just rampant disrespect that may be happening in schools, even if it's done in subtle ways? And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if there's a real leadership demand to try to do the right thing.
I agree. I don't think there is a leadership demand. I think that most people feel comfortable in their own space until they're forced with some adversity, with some diversity, et cetera, et cetera. In the incident down in Florida, there were telltale signs that this particular individual, some may say there was some mental illness involved, but there were telltale signs of this type of outcome.
Right.
And so
he was shooting pets. I mean, he was shooting up neighborhood pets, man.
And this wasn't the first school.
No, man. They're finding dead rabbits everywhere. I mean, he's just shooting anything in the neighborhood. And now if he'd have been a brother. That brother would have not got away with all that shooting.
No.
And they just come to the house, look at him, and say he got a gun, whatever, going back away.
So we have a double, triple, quadruple standard. Right. Because if it was a brother, and lo and behold, and not to minimize this at all, but there's a stand your ground policy in Florida and some other states. Right. And so if I'm shooting animals, and then I turn that shooting or that type of offense to human beings, one may say that person still has their right to stand their ground. The others, most of the children and even adults who sacrifice their lives to save the children, we're saying we're standing our ground on righteousness. Right? And so I'll close with my comments here, and I want to ask you a question, Eric, as well. So I'm still perplexed, to be honest. When I heard of the incident in Florida, I had enough. Right. That's where I am spiritually, Eric. Right. I've had enough. And I know there's a lot of people out there that have absolutely had enough.
Exactly.
Now we need to move to some action. And my question to you is the proverbial elephant in the room. Whatever it is, if it's racism, bigotry, sexism, etc., how do we, I guess, tactfully and respectfully, but directly, address the elephant in the room, even more so with those who are somewhat oblivious to the elephant that's sitting on their chest?
That's a great question, Tommie, and I'll tell you like this. I think, number one, there are different actions that will be taken by different people based upon their vantage point. In other words, I would never say to a hurting family that's dealing with racist acts or sexist acts that they have to try to be balanced. They don't have the same job that you and I have. And so, to some extent, without vigilance, without people putting pressure on institutions to bring about change, it will not occur. Just like we said last week, that sexism didn't just start last year. It didn't just start 6 months ago. But we're seeing through the Me Too movement that because of the pressure of women saying we are no longer taking this, in the old days when the television stations would sort of wake the public out, and then when things died down, they would put Bill O'Reilly back on, but it wasn't dying down. And so I'd say that one of the things that we have to do is we have to be vigilant. Communities have to be vigilant and holding the people, the institutions of power, responsible, and then create allies with others. Now, I think that's the thing that I believe that African Americans have to consider doing a better job of not just looking at our own wounds and our own pains, but coalescing with other communities that are also being disenfranchised. The immigrant community is under siege right now, and we can't just take a rest and say, whew, at least it ain't us. We're so glad to finally be able to get a rest. Yep. It's on somebody else. That sometimes we'll stand down when we need to become engaged. So I think there has to be vigilance. There has to be questions asked. And then I think that we have to have institutions like the Civil Rights Commission of Ohio, the NAACP, have to be putting pressure on these institutions to come up with accountability, do investigations, and then bring in professionals to really help organizations from top to bottom do sort of assessments of what the culture is, assessments of how much diversity do they have there, what are the strategies that they try to utilize, how many minority teachers do they have, administrators. And then we've got to educate people. And I'll tell you what, education is not just one seminar, is it, Tommie?
No, it's not.
I mean, you've really got to, this is something that you've got to do over time and then allow people to practice these skills so that they can then be able to change some of the biases, whether they be implicit or explicit. And then I think that we have to really look at what are some of the other things that we're going to do to make sure that we're holding coaches accountable, extracurricular activity leaders accountable, and measuring results over time. I believe that we're at a time, Tommie, where we're going to need cameras in the classroom.
I agree.
Cameras in schools.
Yeah, I absolutely agree because, we have, and we're just talking about, secondary school systems and high schools and things of that nature, maybe even colleges and universities from an academic perspective. And I say academic because we have faculty and staff, teaching staff, who are somewhat experts in their particular subject matter.
Yes.
Mathematics, physics, history, etc. We do not hold them accountable for having to be an expert in another topic.
Right.
So if a math teacher teaches math for the last 20 years, we don't say we need to put you into a history class and teach history.
Right.
We need to still think and know that those same professionals are not experts in inclusion and diversity.
That's right.
And so it is unrealistic to have a faculty member or even administrator know everything about how to really diffuse situations, how to